During the will reading, my parents' faces split into smiles as the lawyer handed Vanessa a check for $10 million. Then they turned to me, their eyes cold and unyielding, and said, "Go earn your own." I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. Instead, I kept my gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table, pretending my heartbeat wasn't pounding in my ears. But then something shifted. An older man in a gray suit rose slowly, unfolding a worn envelope with my grandfather's handwriting scrawled across it. My mother's smile faded. My father's fingers twitched. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. That envelope altered everything. It marked the start of a storm that would unravel every carefully constructed lie they'd built around us. And it all began in a place I hadn't seen in over a year. My grandfather's ranch on the outskirts of Charleston. Once, the wind there sounded like safety. Now it carried the weight of long-buried secrets. I hadn't returned since spring before my grandfather passed. It was strange how something so familiar could suddenly feel so foreign. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of the car. The wind chimes on the porch, once the soundtrack of lazy summer afternoons and sun tea on the windowsill, now sounded hollow, echoes of something long lost. I hesitated before knocking. The chipped white paint on the door was unchanged, and the magnolia trees still leaned just a bit too far east, but I didn't feel welcome. When the door creaked open, I half expected silence. Instead I heard, "So you finally decided to show up." My grandmother's voice was just as sharp as I remembered, cold enough to cut glass. Arms crossed, jaw set like stone, she stood there, her expression frozen, trying to read something, warmth, relief, confusion. But all I saw was frost. "Grandma, what's going on?" I asked, stepping closer. "They told me you were too busy, that you didn't want to be bothered, that you had a new life," she said, her voice wavering before hardening again. "Your grandfather called for you, every day on his last days. Asked for you." I swallowed hard. "That's not true. I tried to call. I came by in March. Vanessa was here and she said no one was home." Her eyes narrowed. "We were here. We were always here." A long, painful pause followed. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared inside. I followed, the air inside thick and tense, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She returned holding a worn leather notepad. "This is the number he kept calling," she said, handing it to me. I recognized his handwriting immediately, blocky, neat, with a slight slant. "But this isn't my number. Not even close." "Grandma, this isn't my number. I've had the same one since college," I said, backing up for support. Her brow furrowed as she stared at the notepad. "They told us you changed it, that you didn't want to be tracked, that you were ashamed of us." "No," I whispered, feeling my stomach tighten. "They lied. They cut me off from you on purpose." Her hands trembled as she sank into a faded floral armchair by the fireplace, knees giving way. "They told me the funeral was at noon," I said softly. "I got there and it was empty." She looked up, pale. "It was at 9, she replied quietly. "They told everyone you didn't come, that you didn't care." My breath hitched. I would never have missed his funeral. Never. For a moment the room became unbearably quiet. Then, like a crack splitting open a dam, my chest constricted, my vision blurred. I sank down beside her, clutching her hand as if she were a lifeline. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know he was sick until it was too late." Her voice softened, her fingers brushing mine. "We know the truth now. That's what matters. We know." We sat in silence, heavy, thick with everything unsaid. The old clock on the mantel ticked louder than I remembered. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering dry leaves across the porch like restless memories. Finally, Grandma stood, her hands trembling slightly but her eyes blazing with renewed purpose. "I'm calling them," she said. "Calling who?" I asked. She hesitated briefly before moving to the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall, the one Grandpa refused to replace, and began dialing. Each click sounded deliberate, like punctuation in a sentence she'd waited too long to write. Her fingers, thin with age but steady with resolve, moved with purpose. When the line connected, her voice was cold and clipped. "Betty, I need you, Jacob and Vanessa. Here now." A muffled protest sounded through the receiver, but she cut it off. "No, it can't wait. Be here in an hour." Without a goodbye, she hung up. Turning to me, she said, "The lawyer's on his way too." I blinked. "Grandpa's lawyer?" She nodded. He left some instructions, but he made it clear they should only be read aloud with everyone present. So that's what we're going to do. I didn't speak, I just nodded. For the next hour I sat at the small kitchen table, tracing my finger along the wood's edge. The same table where Grandpa used to sip his morning coffee while reading scientific journals I'd sent him from college. The same table where he first asked about my bee in communication, where I told him I wanted to study plant memory and he didn't laugh. I looked around the kitchen. Same curtains, same hum of the old refrigerator, but the air felt different. Footsteps echoed on the porch. The doorbell rang. Grandma placed a hand on my shoulder. Stay here. I'll call you when it's time. From the kitchen I could hear them arriving, my mother's overly sweet voice. Oh my goodness, it smells exactly the same in here. My father's calm, measured tone. I thought this was handled already. Vanessa's dismissive sigh. Seriously, could this have waited until after the estate stuff? Then silence. And Grandma's voice, colder than I'd ever heard, softly commanding, please sit down. Mr. Harold Keene is on his way. He'll be reading Walter's final instructions. I pictured their faces, confused, curious, annoyed. They didn't know I was here. They didn't know what was coming. And neither did I. But deep down I hoped that just once someone would say out loud what I'd always known. That their silence, exclusion, and manipulation weren't misunderstandings, they were choices. The front door creaked again. I heard a new voice, steady, professional. This won't take long, the lawyer said. But it must be done properly. That was my cue. Grandma's voice called out, Claire, come in now. I rose, heart pounding. As I stepped through the doorway into the living room, 3 sets of eyes turned toward me, wide, stunned, unraveling all at once. My mother's smile froze. My father's jaw clenched. Vanessa's face paled. The room snapped with static. They weren't just surprised to see me, they looked terrified. All 3 stared, frozen in place. My mother blinked as if she'd seen a ghost. My father adjusted his collar nervously, a habit I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa's mouth parted, but no words came out. She looked like someone had yanked her script from her hands mid-performance. And in that moment I knew. Everything was about to change. I kept my back straight, refusing to slouch or show weakness. If they thought I'd cower, they'd be disappointed. Grandma gestured toward an empty armchair across from them. Slowly I sat down, steadying my breath. Mr. Keene, the lawyer, offered a brief nod, polite but unreadable, and then opened his leather briefcase, pulling out a thick manila envelope. This, he began, is the last will and testament of Walter R. Whitman, recorded and sealed per his request. Along with the official documents, he has included a handwritten letter to be read aloud. No one spoke. He cleared his throat and started. To my wife, Margaret Whitman. Grandma didn't even blink. I leave our family ranch, the house, and enough funds for her comfort and care. She knows how to find the rest. He turned the page. To my granddaughter, Claire Whitman. The room grew tense. I felt it. The shift in atmosphere as all eyes fixed on me. I leave the Whitman Research Annex at 317 Laurel Creek Road, Charleston, including all laboratory equipment, funding accounts, active research patents, and intellectual property currently filed under Whitman Innovation. A gasp escaped, not from me. My mother's eyes darted toward Vanessa. I kept my hands folded quietly in my lap. Mr. Keene pressed on, and finally the remainder of my estate, financial holdings, stocks, and retirement funds, shall be divided equally between my 2 granddaughters, Claire and Vanessa Whitman. That was the bomb. Silent, elegant, deadly. Then the explosion. Vanessa shot up from her chair, scraping it loudly against the floor. What? She spat, voice cracking. He handed her the annex, the entire facility. Her face contorted with disbelief. That's insane, she burst out. You told me it would all be mine. You said. She pointed wildly at our parents, trembling. You said if I just kept visiting him, if I smiled and played nice, everything would be mine. My father's lips pressed into a tight line, but he said nothing. My mother stared at the floor as if it could swallow her whole. I sat perfectly still, watching it all fall apart. Mr. Keene raised a calm hand. There's more. He pulled out a folded letter from his briefcase. Walter also wrote a personal letter to Claire, to be read aloud here in front of everyone. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, but no one joined her. Grandma handed the lawyer a worn, folded piece of paper from a nearby drawer. He wrote this the week before he died, she said softly. He made me promise to keep it safe. The lawyer unfolded it carefully, revealing grand, confident handwriting filling the entire page. To my dearest Claire, Mr. Keene began. If you're reading this, then I am no longer by your side. But my belief in you remains stronger than ever. The words hit me like a warm breeze through an open window. You're the quiet one, the observer, the thinker, the letter continued. The one who asks why when others don't care to. You built your own truth in a family that never learned to honor yours. I am proud of that. You were never a mistake. You are the legacy I cherish most. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to look away. I wanted them all to hear every word. Mr. Keene's voice stayed steady, even as the weight of those words shifted the room's atmosphere. I saw how you clutched that little notebook when you were 7, tracking how long rain took to fill a glass. I saw how your face lit up when you discovered patterns, even when everyone else saw only distractions. I saw how your joy dimmed when your mother brushed you off or your father changed the subject when you shared something you were proud of. My chest tightened. I remembered that notebook, still had it. He continued, I saw how your light faded when they ignored your achievements. You shined in ways they couldn't understand. Instead of learning your language, they shut you out. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed tightly. I don't blame her entirely, I heard her whisper. She played her part. But you, Claire, you wrote your own role. That takes courage. A tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I remember the day you won your first science fair, I said softly, breaking the tense silence. You asked me to hide the trophy. You said, maybe if I don't show it, they'll stop looking at me like I'm someone else's child. A low, aching exhale echoed from across the room, probably my father. You deserved celebration, Claire. Not invisibility. And while I can't undo the damage, I can give you something completely yours. A place to grow without apology, without shadows. Mr. Keene folded the letter slowly, and the silence that followed was heavy, laden with memories, resentment, and something new, clarity. I cleared my throat. I remember that science fair, I said softly. Mom was at Vanessa's dress rehearsal. Vanessa flinched. I came home with that trophy, feeling like I'd done something wrong. Finally, my father spoke. Claire, this isn't the time to revisit the past. No, I shot back, voice firm. It's the only time. Because all I ever heard was, why can't you be more like your sister? Turning to Vanessa, I added, and from you? Every time I tried to be proud of something, you turned it into a threat. She scoffed. Oh, come on. You always played the victim. I worked for what I got. I nodded. You visited Grandpa when it suited you. Smiled when told to. Said the right things because you thought it would pay off. Her face hardened. And what? You think you're so innocent? You disappeared for years. Well, I was cut off. You gave Grandma a fake number, making sure I never got his messages. That's not distance. That's erasure. My mother rose abruptly. Enough, Claire. No, I said sharply. You're twisting everything. This family's been living a lie, and I let it happen for too long. Grandma cut in fiercely. I watched you all turn a blind eye to Claire's pain. I believed you when you said she didn't care. I should have known better. My father shifted uncomfortably. Look, I said, voice trembling but steady. I got my education, my lab experience, my travels. That wasn't free. Grandpa paid for every bit of it. Scholarships, flights, journals. You didn't even know where I was half the time. My voice cracked. You made me feel like a burden. Grandpa made me feel seen. Vanessa stood up. This is ridiculous. I was told I'd get everything. I stayed. I was the good daughter. No, I said calmly. You were the performer. The favorite. I was the hidden one. But Grandpa didn't forget me. And now you don't get to erase me. Her face twisted. Why should you get anything? Just because you're some genius in a lab coat. I offered a faint smile. Because I earned his love honestly. That's something you'll never understand. Love isn't a performance. Grandma stepped forward. I regret that Walter left you anything, she said, eyes fixed on Vanessa. You played your part, but it was never love. It was business. I'm ashamed I didn't see it sooner. Turning to all of them, she commanded, leave. You're not welcome here. My mother gasped. Mom. Out, Grandma repeated, voice unwavering. They hesitated briefly before Vanessa grabbed her bag and stormed out, heels pounding on the wood like gunshots. My parents followed, muttering about legal battles. And for the first time they couldn't take anything with them. The door clicked shut behind them. No slamming, just finality. I stood frozen, unsure of what I felt. The room was quiet now, peaceful, free. Grandma moved past me and sat slowly on the sofa, her trembling hands now calm in her lap. "They'll come back," I whispered. "They always do." "Maybe," she replied softly. "But this time we don't have to let them in." Took a moment to sink in. For so long I'd operated on a silent agreement. If I proved myself enough, stayed useful, achieved enough, maybe I'd be seen. Maybe they'd call me daughter, sister, family without hesitation. But standing there with my grandfather's words still echoing in my mind, I realized something simple yet profound. I'd been trying to earn love from people who never truly had any to give. And Grandpa? He saw that long before I did. "I need air," I finally said. Grandma nodded and I stepped outside onto the back porch. The boards creaked beneath my feet, once a comforting sound, now a symbol of change. Beyond the fence, the same red dirt field where Grandpa once let me build my first greenhouse. It collapsed after 2 weeks, but he called it a perfect disaster, and we laughed about it for years. I thought of that girl, 10 years old, knees scraped, eyes shining, and wondered how long she had been buried under expectations not her own. When I stepped back inside, Grandma had already placed a kettle on the stove. Her movements were slower now, but every step was deliberate. "You know," she said softly, "Walter started planning that research annex 5 years ago, before he even got sick." I looked at her, caught off guard. "He told me he wanted you to have a space where you didn't need permission to be yourself." Tears welled up before I even realized. Quiet, clean, no shaking, just a gentle release. That night I stayed in my old room for the first time in years. The wallpaper was faded, the mattress too soft, but the ceiling still held those glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa helped me stick up when I was 9. I'd made him arrange them into scientifically accurate constellations. He hadn't questioned it. Lying there, it hit me. This house, once haunted by silence and unspoken pain, no longer felt that way. It felt reclaimed. The next morning I brewed coffee for both of us and brought it to the kitchen table. The same one I used to avoid when my parents visited. Grandma folded the newspaper, offering a tired but warm smile. "So what now?" she asked. "I think I want to see it," I said. "The annex, the lab." She nodded. "He'd like that." I looked out the window as sunlight filtered gently through the magnolia branches. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to run to prove myself or to explain. I didn't feel invisible. And that, more than money, more than any inheritance, was the greatest gift I'd ever received from this family. The one person who truly believed in me had left behind something more enduring than a legacy. He had given me permission to start again. When I first saw the annex, it didn't look like a laboratory. It looked more like a converted barn, and that's exactly what it was. Nestled at the end of a dusty road off Laurel Creek, the building had wide wooden beams, a tin roof, and double doors that looked better suited for a stable than a research facility. But inside was magic. The space had been completely renovated. Glass panels lined the east wall, flooding the room with morning light. Tables were neatly arranged with untouched lab equipment. Microscopes, centrifuges, data tablets, and a 3D printer still wrapped in plastic. Shelves held unopened boxes labeled with my name. In the center stood a workbench on which rested my childhood notebook. The one I thought I'd lost in college, filled with torn pages, messy handwriting, and tiny diagrams of honeybee communication systems. My knees nearly buckled. Grandpa hadn't just built me a lab, he built a home for my mind. Over the following weeks, I moved into the annex full-time. I recruited 2 graduate students, Tara and Micah, friends from my university program who shared the same stubborn hope that science could still be human. We started small. A local grant for microirrigation research, then a partnership with a regional farming co-op to test sustainable crop rotations. We made mistakes, burned equipment, cried over rejected proposals, broke data models, but we kept coming back every day. I unlocked a place that didn't ask me to explain myself, where ideas weren't ridiculed but tested. Where being too intense, too quiet, or too smart wasn't something to apologize for. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal rejection for funding, I found myself alone in the annex. The others had gone home, the lights dimmed, and I sat on the floor by the storage closet, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups. I reached into my bag and pulled out Grandpa's letter, the one I'd asked Mr. Keene to let me keep. I unfolded it, reading the line I'd memorized and whispering it softly into the quiet room. You wrote your own role. It wasn't just encouragement, it was instruction. That night I drafted a new proposal, not for another irrigation system but for a youth science program based in rural schools. A program for kids like I used to be, quiet, curious, overlooked. We called it the Little Scientist Initiative. Our first year we worked with just 12 students from towns where schools still used outdated textbooks, and no one had ever brought a microscope to class. We gave each child a leather-bound notebook, a replica of mine with Grandpa's words stamped on the first page. Write the things you don't understand. One day the world will. That fall, a shy girl named Amber, barely 13, her hair always in her face, showed me pages of bee behavior she'd observed on her own. Her calculations were clumsy, her grammar wild, but her mind was brilliant. When I told her that, she looked at me like I'd handed her a planet. You actually read it? She whispered. I smiled. Of course I did. In that moment I realized this wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about planting something new in better soil, and letting it grow without fear. 3 years after the will reading, I received an email from a lawyer, not Mr. Keene but someone representing Vanessa Whitman. The subject line was brief: request for visit, Claire Whitman, Innovation Annex. Initially I braced for trouble, another attempt to challenge the will, stir up the past. But when Vanessa arrived I hardly recognized her. Gone were the designer heels and perfectly coiffed hair. No makeup, just a navy coat that hung too big for her shoulders. She entered the lobby slowly as if unsure whether she belonged. I stood beside Grandpa's portrait above the reception desk. She paused, her gaze lingering. He always knew who you were, she said softly. Even when I didn't, especially when I didn't. For a moment I didn't know what to say. I simply nodded. I want to see it, she said quietly. The lab, what you've built. I didn't hesitate. I gave her the tour. We wandered through the greenhouse complexes, the crop development rooms, past the display wall filled with photos from our Little Scientist Initiative. She asked simple, honest questions. How do you fund this? What's that device for? Do the kids get to publish? When we reached the community garden she stopped. Children were harvesting lettuce, a mother and son giggling near the compost bins, a father testing soil moisture with a field kit. Vanessa turned to me, her voice breaking. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly. I said nothing, just watched her. She didn't cry, but her hands kept nervously tugging at her sleeves, tracing invisible circles on the railing. I let her stay as long as she needed. No lectures, no retaliation, just truth. Now twice a year Vanessa volunteers at the youth science camp. She helps students learn to present their ideas, explain complex data in plain language, stand with confidence. The kids love her. Some even call her Coach V. At the end of her first summer volunteering she handed me a folder. I wrote a communication guide for the shy kids, she said softly, almost shy herself. Thought it might help. That night I opened it. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was thoughtful, gentle, authentic. And for the first time I saw a version of my sister that didn't scare me. She's never apologized outright, never with words. But she shows up. That's more than I ever expected. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. We're not sisters in the way others might define it. But in this tiny corner of a world Grandpa dreamed into existence, we've stopped pretending. And somehow that feels like the beginning of something real. It's been 6 years since the will reading. 6 years since my parents and Vanessa slammed the front door behind them, their footsteps echoing down the porch like an ending no one applauded. I haven't spoken to them since. Sometimes their names pop up in emails I don't open. Charity press releases, financial articles from Florida where they retired early. I don't hate them. I don't miss them either. What I do think about is the work. The annex has grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as one converted barn is now a full research campus. 4 labs, 3 greenhouses, and over 60 acres of trial fields. We've developed drought-resistant seeds that now feed thousands in southern regions where traditional crops fail. We've partnered with universities from Kenya to Brazil, sharing findings in regenerative agriculture. And just last month I stood on a stage in San Francisco, accepting a national grant for climate innovation. The lights were bright but I didn't flinch. I wore a navy suit with Grandpa's pocket watch tucked inside the breast pocket, the one Grandma gave me last year with his initials barely faded. Inside the lid was a tiny photo of me, 10 years old, standing proudly next to my honeybee communication display, grinning ear to ear. He carried it with him every day, Grandma had said. Now it sits on my desk at the annex, bathed in morning light, casting small circles of brightness over my notes. Some days I talk to him. Not aloud, just in quiet. When an experiment fails, or when a student from the program wins a scholarship, or when I remember how close I came to believing I didn't matter. He never let me disappear, really. And now I understand why. Legacy isn't a monument. It's a map, constructed from choices, kindness, and tiny anchors left behind so someone can follow when the world tries to erase them. These days, Grandma lives in a small apartment connected to my house in town. She's slower now, more forgetful, but still sharper than anyone I know, especially when it counts. Every morning we share coffee in the sunroom. She tells me stories about Grandpa I've never heard. How he once planted a tree just to propose, how he believed soil could remember kindness, how he always knew I'd come back. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had to leave to understand what coming home truly meant. Some evenings I walk to the far end of the annex fields, past the solar irrigation test beds and the kids' garden plots, to an old wooden bench Grandpa built by hand. From there I can see the stars, real ones, not the glow-in-the-dark kind I used to stick on my bedroom ceiling. But they still make me think of that girl I once was, the one who kept asking why even when no one cared to answer. The girl who refused to be silent, who believed in him. And on nights when the wind moves just right through the trees, I swear I can hear his voice in the leaves. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will. And now finally it does.